Hello and welcome to another episode of A View from the Top. I'm Adrian Cropley. A View from the Top is a regular podcast from the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence, where I interview some of the world's leading communication professionals as we explore their career journey. Today's guest is certainly a powerhouse in the communication profession. Strategist, author, podcaster, and international speaker are among her many titles in a career with nearly 20 years of experience as a communication professional. Jenni works with organizations to help them understand the power of communication, to help them go from chaos to calm. That's why her organization is called Redefining Comms, which she started back in 2017. Whether it's advising on communicating through change, speaking at a conference, or providing extra support to communication teams, Jenni provides her wisdom and strategic prowess to get business outcomes for her clients. But you don't get there unless you've had a great career and built a body of knowledge and expertise over many years. Jenni is a qualified internal communication practitioner, chartered PR practitioner, and fellow of the Chartered Institute. She's also an accredited facilitator and certified company director. Most importantly, well, I believe is the most important thing, she's the co-host of Calm Edge Rebels, a podcast she hosts with my previous guests, Avita Patel and Trudy Lewis. If I was playing Monopoly, I really feel like I had the green streets covered. We had Bond, Oxford, and Regent. Finally scoring time with Jenni to make a valuable set of high-value communication professionals from London. Jenni, welcome to the podcast. How did you like that introduction?
What an introduction. I had a little flashback then to Monopoly of my childhood, playing it with my sister, so that was lovely. But it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
It's terrific to be talking to Jenni. And when I was thinking about it, I've got these three powerhouses from London. I can't think of anything more than if I scored that green set on Monopoly, I knew I was on the winning team. And that's exactly what you guys are. But I'm not going to talk about Trudy and Avita today. I'm going to talk about you, because you also have your own podcast, Redefining Communications, and a book, actually, Influential Internal Communication. So which one do we explore first, Jenni? Which came first, the book, the podcast?
Oh, which came first? The book came first, which wasn't intentional at all, but the book came out April 2021, and then the podcast came out, I think, later on that year, just to try and give people some kind of bite-sized content to help, really.
Brilliant. So what was the catalyst behind doing the book?
So the book came from the work that I'd done to kind of talk about the business and what we do. So where I talk about, as you said into your introduction, we help organizations go from chaos to calm. And we do that by taking them through the field model, which is where you understand the symptoms, you diagnose the root cause, and then you fix that root cause. So as I started to work through that model, I started to scribble down all the things that would be on the understand column, on the diagnose column, and on the fix column. And that's where the book started to come from, really. Alongside that, I am an avid reader. So I read a lot. And it was getting to the point where I was thinking, God, if people just read a little bit of this book and a little bit of this book, then we'd start to really move things forward for the workplace and communication. So the book is kind of two parts. It's got parts to it where it talks about understanding people and neuroscience and globalization in organizations, and why we listen to some people, why we don't listen to others. And then the second half is about the model and how you can use communication to streamline your organization to be more efficient and more engaging.
When you look at the motivation behind doing a book, because I look at it and I go, oh my God, that's a lot of words to put in there. Did you find once you started writing, it all just came to you?
Yeah, it's very much my brain in a book. So it's probably the most vulnerable thing I've done.
Oh, wow.
But because I did it with publishers, so Kogan Page published the book, you have some guidance, which I wanted. I've never written a book before. I don't know how to write a book. Yeah. And I wanted to make sure I had that support from an editorial perspective. So that was really helpful. because you do just start writing and then somebody reads it and goes, this doesn't make any sense. You need a chapter on chaos for this to make sense, which is hugely helpful. So it does just start flowing. And I think when you're researching, when you're reading anyway, for me, it didn't feel like a hugely laborious process. My husband would say the opposite of that. I do remember saying to him, if I ever say I'm going to write another book, remind me of this. And I'm now in talks with publishers about another book. So he's like, we did talk about this.
He said, should I remind you, or have you got your heart already set that you're going to do another book?
I'm doing it. There's no stopping me now.
I have to say, I mentioned to my partner once that I think I might write a book, and he just looked at me and rolled his eyes, and I went, okay, so I might think a little bit longer. But, where did it all start for you, your career? I mean, you just didn't fall into internal comms. I mean, you started somewhere, and along that journey, you suddenly went, oh, actually, this is something I really enjoy doing, and I think this is what my career is going to be about.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. So I'll go sort of right back to education, because that's where it started for me. I wanted to work in PR. So when I was doing my A-levels, so at college, I thought I really want to go and work in PR. Brilliant. And I didn't do very well in my A-levels. I had a very good time, but I didn't do very well. And so when
you're bringing back memories. Can I tell you? I'm going, sure, I'm glad it's not just me.
No, we're never alone. And so I tried to get a job in PR, but everyone said, no, you need a degree at that time. Yeah. So I ended up going and doing a degree in marketing and got a 2-1 in that, which I was very pleased with. And then my first job was actually as a communications assistant for a local government, sort of local council near where I lived. And it was a really great first job because it was doing everything. It was supporting on the press office when media queries would come in. It was helping with the elections. It was helping with internal communications. We were doing some redundancies, so helping those. Yep. It was doing campaigns. It was a real sort of let's do everything. Yeah. And I loved that. And I loved the media side of it. So I thought, right, I'm going to go and specialize in media. I really enjoy the picking up the phone and the running around when you've got to deal with a press query. So I went and worked for a corporate company, a large defense company, as a media relations advisor for them. Yeah. So, which was great. So I did a couple of years for them, specializing in the media, really specializing in trade media and trade press. And I traveled a bit, doing different sort of trade shows and things like that, which was really good. But I sort of felt then, this feels quite formulaic. I don't feel like I'm not seeing an impact on my work that means something to me. Yep. And that was where I then thought, right, I'm going to go and try the internal comms, because I'd had a grounding in all sorts of things from the communications assistant role. I thought, right, I'll go over to do internal comms. So I went to work for an advertising company who did sort of, the phone books. I'm really showing my age now. So you have sort of like yellow pages. It was like yellow pages, but a not so well-known version of that in the UK. When I say advertising company, I feel like I need to clarify it wasn't that glamorous. And so I went and worked for them, and that was setting up my first internal communications function. Wow. So that was in the marketing team. They had hired me as internal communications officer, which was a random job title. And
didn't you love they used to call those roles officer roles in the early days?
And I was the only officer in the whole organisation. There was no one else with this officer title other than me in internal comms.
Fantastic.
It was truly strange. So that was, so I did that for a couple of years, loved that, and then went and worked for an agency, a specialist internal comms agency as marketing and business development manager, which really immersed me in the internal comms industry. I started looking at writing white papers on social media. So really got the bug then. And then went back into corporate life as internal communications manager, setting up another function for a food and beverage company in London, and stayed there for about 6 years and growing the role, growing my career, and left there as the global head of communication. So bringing my internal and external together again towards the end of that. And then went off, got headhunted to go and be communications director for a pharmaceutical company, again, to set up the function for them based on a merger that they were going through. And so
you've got quite a reputation. Sideways. I can hear the theme.
Come in, set it up, go. Yeah. Come in, set it up, go.
These, there's something quite powerful though about going into an organization and setting up the function. And this is going to be a left of field question because I'm talking about career, but an observation from you around every time you went into an organization, you were asked to set it up. Was there anything common that you saw between those organizations that went, there's almost a formula when you step into an organization, and this is what you see when you open the door, and these are the things that need to be fixed?
Yeah, and as we're talking about it, you can see how the field model came about for me as a consultant in terms of that understand, diagnose, and fix. So the common things that I tend to see is making sure that you're addressing the business problems. Yes. And I think that's what I learned really early on. When I did the first one, I was really starting to look at how do we change how the business functions or how the information flows. It was quite, I'd say, more engagement heavy, the first one. So we did lots of campaigns around, the sales team had a big trip to Miami as the prize for the best salespeople. So how do we get people engaged and motivated behind that? So we did lots of campaign stuff. As I then sort of moved on, it became much more about the business impact. What is the problem that we're trying to solve by hiring a communications expert to come into this organization? And those are the conversations that I have. So the commonality is there is a problem you're trying to fix. I need to find out what that problem is and then make sure that this function is designed to fix that. Because it's not about what I think all the time. It's about what's right for the organization, which is why now, whenever I work with teams, we talk about what's the purpose of your function and do you have that documented? Because if you don't, you're going to get taken off into all sorts of different directions, which is really hard when you're a very small team.
And I'm working in internal comms and setting up that function. Did you come across the barriers from an organization's mindset about what internal comms was about?
Oh, yes. Yes. And in fact, yes. And there are lots of people who like the idea of a communications person, but they don't enjoy the reality of that.
Yeah.
And that is hit and miss depending on the organization. So where I've gone in and done it, for the most part, people are just really glad there's someone in here to help that knows how to make a difference and how to do it. Whereas in some, when you start going in and saying, you can't just make up stuff.
Yes.
that's kind of not okay.
Why not?
I know. And people go, oh, I'm not sure I like making up stuff. And so that's where the challenge is. And also some people, and I think this is something we're seeing quite a lot of, I'd say in the last couple of years, feel that their organization has to have this sort of entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
And when you come in as a communication professional, there can be often a bit of pushback that you're trying to kind of over professionalize it or make it too corporate when we want to have this entrepreneur. And I was like, oh, that's not what we're doing. We're trying to create a framework for you to communicate in an ethical and truthful way that builds trust and engagement. It's not about, making it corporate. And I think that's the balance for people and that's kind of the push. The other pushback can sometimes be the behavior change that's needed. So where now, working with clients, I can put in communication templates, I can put in the process, I can do all of that. But if you don't change your behaviors, this won't work. And that's really uncomfortable.
But that's a really good point, Jenny, is that if you're to leave the function, because you're get in there, let's get this set up and develop a function. And I guess the reward at the end of the day is being able to walk away from that, leaving the organization to still have this great communication function. So for a lot of the leaders within organizations, what do you think was the biggest challenge when it came to the culture and leaving that culture of communication?
It is the behaviors. It is I've got to change how I do things and understanding the unintended consequence of those behaviors that I think people don't see. Because even if I think about my career going in and setting up and the clients we work with and helping them set up functions, which is often what we're doing, that piece around, okay, I didn't realize that when I say this or when I do this, that's the impact that has on other people. It's that kind of emotional intelligence piece of leaders that I think is still the gap that we need to kind of work on. And I always say communication is the tangible representation of culture.
Yes.
And I think that's exactly what we see. So it's, well, you're doing this, therefore that's the impact. And it's that tangibility of it that they just really struggle with in terms of how it feels to the people on the receiving end.
And it's really why that, that change communication piece is just so very important too. And I don't know whether you had a similar experience, but I know when I started stepping into organizations and taking them through that growth journey, I just kept going, oh, here we are again. We're in this change piece because we are trying to change attitudes and behaviors. And suddenly this is now what we're thinking about, because we're not about building a function, we're about changing the organization dynamics to be better at communication.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so interesting. When I created the field model, I think it was Advita actually that said to me, well, it's a change model. And I was like, is it?
Yes.
I hadn't even really thought about that. But it is, and it is about change. And, people say change is the only constant, which I hate. But there is this element of it is constantly evolving. And when you are setting it up, there are lots of things that have to change.
Yeah.
And you have to get involved with the operations and the rhythm of the organization and how it flows. And because you can't put a communication function in or the structure in without looking at how things move and flow and how things get done. If you ignore that and just look at channels, you're not going to succeed, because you're just kind of papering over the cracks. You have to get underneath that. How does stuff get done here? Or how does it not get done here? And then how do we make that change?
And it's really funny because I had a chat with one of my new clients last week. And I remember when I was doing the briefing with them and they said, oh, we've put together a slide pack of all of our channels for you. So, and it'd be really good to understand what we need to change with the channels. I went, okay, well, we're going to take you on a little bit of a journey here.
Yeah.
And when the cogs start whirring in the brain going, okay, this might be a challenge, just to go, I'm going to burst your bubble just a little bit. We're not going straight to the tactics here. We actually need to understand what you need to get as an outcome from communication.
Yeah. Why are you doing it? I think
why are you doing it?
Stuff. Yeah. When we're reviewing strategies of communication or helping create them, it is, to what end is often a question I ask. This is great. This is really amazing activity, but why are we doing this? To what end? And then people sort of look at you blankly and you go, right, let's start from here. And let's work backwards.
I think you've got to burst a few bubbles before you can pump the tires, right?
Oh, totally. I always say we've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's what we've got to do, and it is going to be uncomfortable, but it's okay.
But Jenni, you've got the personality to take people on that journey. They don't feel too deflated, I'm sure, after speaking with you. They've still got the smile.
Someone said to me last week, I feel sort of bruised and upbeat in equal measure. It's like, that's the perfect balance for me. That's what I was going for.
I think that's what you want to hear from a client. It's like, I'm pushing you, but I'm pushing you so very nicely. Yes,
I'm doing it with a smile.
But the thing is, you don't get to do what you're doing now. Your podcast, running your practice, writing books, without that experience of time and putting these things into practice, because that's where you get your passion from. What are some of the learnings you've had? What were some of those major milestones in your career where you got the biggest learning, and what did you learn?
So, there's a couple that come to mind. There's one which was with a quite a challenging CEO that I was working for, and they didn't really see the value in communication at all. So I do a lot of, when I speak, quite often I speak about how to get leaders engaged in what you're doing. And I remember that because I was very focused on the fact they were quite data driven. So I was like, I'll get loads of data, and that didn't work. And I was determined to find a way through. And actually, it was when I started to really listen to the language they used, and they talked about value a lot with other functions. What's the value this brings? Predominantly financial. That was their big focus, was sort of shareholder return.
Yep, great.
So I sort of took a deep breath and went in and said, what do you mean by value for communication? Can we have a conversation about what that looks like for you? And they said it's all about risk and reputation. And at this point, I was global head of communication, so looking at internal and external. And that insight from them about risk and reputation was helpful, because
Yes.
it allowed me to reframe all the things I wanted to do based on what they were trying to achieve. So rather than saying, the team in America aren't engaged in our digital platform, we need to get them engaged in it. I need to go over there and help them understand how to use it. And the CEO is going, absolutely not. Like, why would we do that? So when I reframe that and say there's a risk that the US team are going to spend £500,000 on another digital platform when we have one,
Yes.
it was like, get on the plane and go and sort that out.
Yeah.
So by listening, you can really unlock what you want to do,
Yes.
but you unlock it in a way that allows you to influence upwards. So that was quite a big turning point for me in terms of being able to influence leaders. And that's one I often talk about.
Yeah, and it's a valuable lesson in consulting, isn't it? When you look at, in fact, what's going to float their boat at the end of the day, when you deliver an outcome that actually meets with an expectation. And in fact, they get the surprise where they go, actually, we are looking at this return for communication that we kind of didn't think about in the first place. Yeah,
and this also comes back to different leaders having different expectations of communication. Yeah. So I remember getting a new CEO when I was head of internal comms for the UK part of a global business. And I knew he was coming from Pizza Express, I think at the time, which is a pizza chain. And so I reached out to the head of internal comms for Pizza Express and said, this guy's coming over here. Can we have coffee? So we had coffee, so I could say, like, what's he like? What does he value about you? How do you work with him? And everyone I've shared that story with says, that's such a good idea. I've never thought of reaching out to the person that was the comms person that they worked with before. But that's great, because then you know what you're doing. And that for me is so important, because otherwise it's so broad what we do that if I'm thinking, quite strategically and risk and value and this, and they're thinking, just do me a newsletter once a week, love, and that would be great. Yeah. Then we need to work on this, and I need to know what that challenge is ahead of me, or what the process is going to be. So that whole leadership piece was quite a big learning for me. I think the other one that's worth mentioning is, and I've talked about it a lot recently, because the importance of context and communication seems to be coming up quite a lot at the moment.
Yes.
And I remember launching a strategy when I was working at the pharmaceutical company, and we were launching the business strategy following the merger. And it was sort of a merger and acquisition. It was very complicated. But I was very focused on making sure that the language made sense, because what we're trained in quite a lot is make sure it makes sense to someone that's about 12 years old. That's what we're aiming for.
Yes. That's where we're pitching it.
So that's where we're pitching. I've got that. But when we were talking about the strategy to the team that were in the manufacturing part of the business, making, the drugs, this didn't mean anything to them. Even though it was understandable at that level, the nuance of the context was missing for them. And that was on me, because I hadn't thought about that at all. And the example I gave the other day was Professor Brian Cox, who a lot of people will know, the physicist who does a lot of stuff. And I've watched him speak at a conference. I was speaking at the same conference as him a few years ago. And when he speaks, I think, I know what all these words mean. I know what they mean, but when you put them together in a sentence, I don't know what that means. Because my brain just can't work that way around physics. It just doesn't do it. And I thought, this is exactly what I've done to these people in manufacturing. They're going, I know what all those words mean, but when you put all that together, this is just gobbledygook. So my learning from that was actually go and test your messaging with those segments in your organization to check that it makes sense. Yeah. Because I didn't do that. And if I was doing it again, that's absolutely what I would do.
And isn't it funny, all the terminology that we come out with in our various professions, and a lot of what we do in communication is play the interpreter, but sometimes we've actually got to look at our own backyard and go, when are we losing the audience in what we're saying? Because we're so passionate about what we do. I had a great example. Was it last week? I was running some writing courses, which I never thought I'd ever do, for government. Equally, how did I ever get into that space? But I used the word collateral the other day, thinking the stuff that you put together, and I just used the word, and somebody went, "Oh, Agent, I don't know what you mean by that," and I went, oh, you're right. I'm using technical jargon. So I mean stuff that you produce, right? So
yes,
the stuff that you write, the stuff that you produce.
It sounds far less glamorous when you say this is stuff that you produce versus collateral.
You've got to get back to the basics, don't you?
100%. And I think part of having conversations with different people from different places really helps that. I've got some friends that are in the military, and if I talk to them about what I do, I have to really think about how I'm explaining it, because if I say to them, oh, we were tendering for some work the other day and we had to do a pitch, they're looking at me like, what? So, when you have some of those conversations, you have to really think about, how do I explain what I've done today in a way that's going to make sense to someone that has no idea what this world is? And so I find that quite challenging, but I think that's really what we've got to aim for. And it was such a huge learning for me, because I remember sitting there thinking, oh, this is not going well. I've messed up here.
How many times do we sit there in that position though, and then going, okay, yes, we need to rethink this one.
Yes.
As we start looking at it, I could speak to you for hours, but what I would love to do is get some tips to share with up and coming communication professionals. The ones that are sitting there early in their career going, what do I have to do to make a difference in my organization and be seen for the value I add as a communication professional? And you've shared some great insights, but maybe look at the top couple of tips that you would give to up and coming communication professionals.
So network would be the biggest one. So I've been a member of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations for a long time, and I volunteered with them, and that really helped me build my network, get to know different people, and that was a huge part of the turning point for my career. I'm also a member of the IABC, which is the International Association of Business Communicators. It's how we know each other. And so trying to find those people and network and reach out to them on LinkedIn and connect. Don't be afraid to do that. Internal communications as a profession is lovely. Everybody wants to help everybody.
Isn't
it? It's so lovely. There's no one that's well, and if they do go away, then they're just not very nice. But
they probably shouldn't be in internal comms, right?
You can't, because we're in the business of relationships. So it's very difficult to do that. So if you're listening to this and want to connect with me, do so on LinkedIn. If you're struggling, ask questions. That's what we're here for, to kind of help people. So the first one is networking. The second one, I would say, is if you really want to show how you're adding value, you want to demonstrate that, you have to show up consistently every day. So you have to be consistent in your kind of behaviors. You have to be clear on your boundaries in terms of, what's acceptable to you, what isn't. And you have to tune into what is the impact that your business needs you to have. So how do you sort of match that together? But if you're not, showing up on time for meetings, being reliable, demonstrating things around credibility, that's where things are going to fall down. And that's up to us in some ways to kind of, parent ourselves to do that, especially in a working from home environment where it's quite easy to, be a bit late to something, or, whatever, or not really be paying attention because it's a Zoom call and you've got some emails you need to do. Like, it's a lot of self-discipline when you're trying to build your brand and make sure that people can see the value that you can add.
And it is about building a brand, isn't it? I mean, all of those tips are really about a young professional that needs to establish themselves.
Yeah, and don't be, I've had lots of people in my career say things to me like, don't run before you can walk, and you'll never progress here because, when you came in, you were like a bull in a china shop, so you'll never sort of progress through the ranks. And I became the global head of communication. So you will adapt to things, but get some coaching, get a mentor, learn and find ways to adapt and upskill yourself. I'm naturally quite opinionated. I rush to speak. I talk very quickly when I get animated, and I can be quite firm and quite assertive. If I go in with that approach, it doesn't always get the best results. So I've had to learn how to sort of dial that down in places, how to dial it up when it's needed. And the example I always give is, I used to sit in meetings physically with my hand across my mouth. So I'd have my elbow on the table and my mouth in my hand as my sort of physical way of being like, don't say anything, because I know how quickly I want to interject. And after doing that for a little while, you sort of don't need to restrain yourself. But it's finding those little techniques that help you grow and listen more and all of those things that we all have to go through. There are people very early on in my career that probably look at me now and think, I can't believe she's written a book and she's an international speaker and podcaster and she's doing this, because she was really gobby when she came here. There'll be a lot of people very confused, but it's just learning, networking and changing your behavior to get the results that you want to get, really.
Well, it is, and I've got visuals now that next meeting I go into, I probably need to put my hands across my entire face, because I've learned as I'm getting older, the facial expressions show everything. So,
yes.
And somebody said, Adrian, you did realize you rolled your eyes slightly in that last meeting. I went, oh, did I? Damn it! I thought I was covering that really well.
You'll have to get like a balaclava or something.
That's it. Can I just put the hood on while we're in this meeting, because I know what's coming?
I'm going to sit facing the wall while you're talking, because I know that my face is going to give me away.
Yes, I'll just hear. But look, absolutely fabulous tips, Jenni. And I can't believe we're at the end of our time. And thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself in this podcast. And this is why I love doing what I'm doing, is because I get to speak to people like yourself.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Jenni. And keep us posted when that next book comes out, because we'll have to share that in the network.
I will do. I will definitely be keeping you posted.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jenni, and thanks for your time. Looking forward to connecting next time on our next episode of A View from the Top. So goodbye and enjoy the world of communication.